Lauren and Sam, thanks for the intro. I don't do Ironman anymore. I learned that it was probably a silly way to spend my time, and it would probably make me age a lot faster, which brings us into a bit of what we're going to be talking about today. When I first looked at the schedule for today, I got slightly nervous looking at the fact that I was before lunch, because usually most people are falling asleep in that period before lunch, but reliably informed that there's no blood glucose regulation issues in the audience today, so that's all good. Right, so I'm going to be talking about the concept of Healthspan today, and bringing forward some evidence-based lifestyle medicine strategies so that you can live well longer. So a brief overview, talking a bit about my personal journey as a medical doctor, an athlete, and how that has evolved my current practice. To describe what Healthspan is, a bit about environment, gene influences, and then lifestyle and exercise strategies which you can use every day to improve your Healthspan. And then somewhat touching about nutrition, nutraceuticals, that's supplements, and other ways that you can modify your Healthspan. So slightly different from all the talks that we've heard so far, but hopefully you should find it interesting, informative, and be able to learn something. So a little bit about me. I've become increasingly interested in sort of longevity medicine, how to age well longer, and also performance medicine. During my time as an athlete, I went through all the pitfalls that were classic, got overtrained, got hormonal issues, got thyroid issues, iron issues, gut issues. Is there anything else I can find there? Pretty much everything that a lot of people that do endurance sport get. And no one really knew how to fix it. So I kind of tried to figure out myself how I could fix myself. And through that journey, I became interested in tracking blood tests, biomarkers, and looking at the research to show how I could perform and feel better. So I'm conventionally trained for my sins at King's College London. I also did a degree in neuroscience. We, as we've already talked about, had very few lectures in nutrition and exercise. We knew it was something that we should probably do, but no one really knew how to link the role of nutrition to lifestyle, to the diseases that we see most commonly today. So through my own personal experience, I've mentioned something here that I touched more upon last year, psychological issues as a child growing up with family trauma. And then I suffered a severe brain injury at the age of 22 in my final year at medical school, which ended me up in a coma for 48 hours. And I wasn't really supported after that by conventional medicine. No one really knew how to deal with it other than to give me antidepressants, sleeping tablets, and ever increasing doses, but didn't really explain to me how I could heal my brain naturally. So again, I had to figure it out myself. Exercise was definitely part of that journey. We know that it can improve neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in the brain. We know that exposure to light also makes the brain regenerate. So that, amongst other nutritional changes I made, really helped me recover. As I've mentioned here, I found solace in sport. My dad himself was a professional athlete. He competed in the Tour de France a number of times. So I grew up around a rather crazy cyclist father. And as I've mentioned here, all of those strategies eventually helped me to heal naturally and wean myself off doses of medication like Prozac and sleeping tablets that we all know are popped very regularly by people these days, unfortunately. As I've said here too, modifying my approach in nutrition to enable strength and performance and well-being, as opposed to being focused on body weight and composition. So the whole concept of move more and eating less doesn't quite cut it for me. I wanted to look at the science a bit more and see how we can personalize a medicine approach. So I worked in the NHS for a number of years in psychiatry, general practice, a bit of anaesthetics, a bit of hospital medicine, but I increasingly got frustrated by the use of medications and other pharmaceuticals. And so last year I left the NHS and now run a private practice in lifestyle medicine. I was always interested from the start about health data to inform behavior change, so tracking biomarkers in the blood, getting people, consumers, to engage with their health, to identify key markers in the blood, which we'll come to, that we know can be correlated with improved feelings of well-being and also aging better, reducing your risk of chronic diseases. Another key interest of mine is hormonal balance, specifically of the perimenopause and adrenal dysfunction. So Healthspan is the amount of time we live with good health and normal function. On average, it's estimated that we live up to 20% of our lives unhealthily. So it's a long time when you think about it. So what I want to encourage people to do is to identify strategies now that they can use to prevent aging, not cure. And the earlier you start, the better. I became really interested in this after the effects of endurance training had on myself and my physiology. And I did a test called a telomere test, which we'll come to, which measures basically cellular aging. And I measured it when I was an endurance athlete, and I measured it a year and a half after I had a child. And I saw that there was deterioration. So even at the age of 37, I became concerned that I was perhaps aging more than I otherwise would be if I adopted a different way of living and eating. You can determine your health span by going to that link online. I know we'll share this, this presentation. It was developed by a lady called Dr. Sarah Gottfried, who has written a book called Younger, and had developed a Younger protocol. So if you go to that health span link there, you'll be able to determine your own health span. So some of the determinants of health span. I'll start at the top left, was one that kind of gets missed in all the excitement about fads and diets and nutrition. So we've got social connectedness. We know now that you can be as healthy as you like, never drink, never smoke, you know, do everything, eat a high-fat, low-carb diet. But if you live on your own, you don't have social interactions, you don't have a sense of purpose, a community, you will likely die younger. So we know that social connectedness is a really important determinant of health span. The concept of stress resilience. So stress has become a buzzword of society now. We all need to reduce our stress. There's too much stress in the environment. But how the individual responds to stress is very different from person to person. It depends on your background, it depends on your life experiences, it depends on your support network, and it also depends on how robust your physiology is, how supported your physiology is. Stress is only as much as the body perceives it. So, the other factors, oxidative stress is something a bit different. Oxidative stress is what happens in the body as a biochemical process, the creation of free radicals. A little bit of oxidative stress is good. Too much is very damaging to the cells. Air travel creates oxidative stress. Pollution creates oxidative stress. Small dense LDL cholesterol particles can augment oxidative stress. Antioxidants reduce oxidative stress. They mitigate the damage that could be caused by free radicals. We'll touch on that a bit more later. You've got dental health there. Flossing, cleaning your teeth after meals. We know that inflammation in the mouth and bacterial dysbiosis in the mouth can be related to heart disease. Body composition. We know a lot that the more lean muscle you have, the better you fare as you age. And the distribution of body fat. So if you have less fat stored around the middle, more fat stored around your hips if you're a woman, we know that abdominal obesity is the most damaging place to store fat. The one on the glucose regulation, I know it's obviously been talked about a lot. That's the 24-hour glucose monitor that I use with patients now, even if they're diabetic or not. I found it very useful because even as a personal experiment, tracking your blood glucose over 24 hours, seeing how it changes in response to not just food, but to exercise, to stress, it was very interesting even for me, because I thought, you know, I'm very stable in my blood glucose, but actually I noticed that if I did something even like a short run, my blood glucose would go up to like 9 or 10, which I thought was quite strange. But if you think about it, we are metabolizing our stores, bringing it into the system to be used more. But it did drop down quite soon after. So I encourage people, even if they don't have diabetes, especially if there's metabolic syndrome in the family or a concern around pre-diabetes, to, you know, just buy a glucose monitor and track themselves for 2 weeks. Each patch lasts for 2 weeks. It's non-invasive. You can swim, bike, run, shower, everything with it. And it is really interesting to see what foods and what lifestyle factors affect your glucose. So diet quality. Mediterranean diet, we've talked lots about that. We know that micronutrient density is important. Cardiovascular fitness. The slightly off-piste one there, having a long-lived mum. If your mum lived to a ripe old age, it's likely that you will too. Sleep quality. Daily activity level, movement matters. Posture matters. Posture affects digestive function. It affects our nervous system. And mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. I mean, it might sound quite boring to sort of plug into something and say, right, I'm going to do 20 minutes of headspace now. But you don't have to. You could just go about certain daily activities more mindfully, like doing the washing up. Perhaps if you're doing some exercise, instead of listening to music, listen to your breath, count your breaths, trying to quieten the mind. We know that that resets the central nervous system. We know that that reduces stress perception. So that, in turn, can improve your health span. More about the physiological determinants of health span. So, as we can see here, cardiovascular fitness, I'm going to go back to that again, because in all the trials it's an independent predictor of health span. Skeletal muscle strength. So the caveat to that is, if you're going to work out, do concentrate on the large muscles of the lower legs. I always encourage people to, you know, at least once or twice, get someone that knows what they're talking about at the gym, personal trainer, and do some squats, do some heavy strength work with good posture if your body allows it, because we know that people age better if they have strong lower bodies. The other one here is grip strength, which has been studied a lot in the literature. How strong your grip is a determinant of how well you age. So it's sort of a tactic that I've told patients to employ, is just to get a grip strength. I don't even know what they're called. You can, yeah, exactly, a handspring. You can buy them on Amazon for like $5, and if you're on a car journey or a plane travel or anywhere you're sitting for a while, just use the handspring, improve your grip strength. The other one here is retinal health, so looking at your eyes, having regular checkups, seeing if you have advanced glycation end products, which, as we may have touched upon, is related to blood glucose control. So, talking about the actual biomarkers, there's lots of information here, so I don't want to overwhelm you too much. But these are some of the biomarkers in blood tests that I measure with patients to help determine overall metabolic health. The caveat to this is that you can get some of these tests on the NHS. You can't get all of these tests on the NHS. Companies like Invivo outside offer a range of these tests. I've always been about trying to engage people with their data, so we're developing a technology platform so people can visualize these blood tests much more readily and understand what they actually mean. So you've got inflammation here, a variety of inflammation markers, C-reactive protein, omega-3 ratio, ESR, and IL-6, and this concept called inflammaging, where we know that inflammation is a key driver to many of the diseases associated with aging and chronic disease. Vitamin D. We all hear about vitamin D. It's so important for health and longevity. I will talk some specifics about vitamin D a little bit later. IGF-1, growth hormone. We know that some growth hormone is necessary. Too much can be a driver of cancer. We know that IGF-1 is insulin-like growth factor. It's determined by carbohydrate in the diet. But we also know that it's important for muscle and strength, hence mentioning a paradox here. Too much IGF-1, and it's more likely you can have accelerated cancer development if you're at risk of cancer, but too little IGF-1, and you'll have you'll have accelerated aging, and you'll have lower body, a lower lean muscle. DHEA is a pro-hormone in the body. We know that it can feed down to testosterone and estrogen and other steroid hormones. We know that levels, if they're sustained into old age, are associated with more healthy aging. DHEA can be taken as a supplement. But actually in the UK it's a prescribed substance, so it does need regulating by a doctor. We know that chronically high cortisol levels, that whole idea of the stress being perceived by the body, is catabolic. It breaks down and it can be toxic and inflaming to the brain. We know we've already talked a lot about HbA1c and insulin sensitivity. Exercise makes you more insulin sensitive. Having more lean body mass makes you more insulin sensitive, so you'll have a lower likelihood of developing insulin resistance. And also, I'm not sure this has been touched upon, but cholesterol particle size. I do look at this with people, especially if they're on high fat or ketogenic diets, especially if they're having excess saturated fat or if they've got a family history of cardiovascular disease. It is a test you can buy privately. It looks at not just the HDL and the LGL and the triglycerides, but it also looks at the small dense particles of LDL, which are the ones that are more likely to stick to the intima of the arteries and in the context of inflammation cause disease. This test costs around £75. The other one, the test I mentioned right at the beginning, is the telomere test. Telomeres are little caps that sit on the end of the cellular DNA, and every time they replicate, the telomere length declines. So a good correlator of healthy aging is the percentage of long telomeres that you have. So lots of studies are going in now into looking at why some people have long telomeres and some people have shorter telomeres. We know that you will age faster and die younger if you have short telomeres. We know that maternal nutrition, so how well your mum ate when you were in the womb, determines telomere length. So you're born with a predisposition to age faster, depending on what your mum ate. Thanks, Mum. Right, breathe for a second. I've mentioned inflammation. This is a rather complex picture that shows you how inflammation is a driver to a number of diseases. We've got this concept of the leaky gut. Everyone heard about leaky gut? Okay, so that essentially means that the gut barrier has become compromised, probably from a result of overgrowth of nasty bacteria, from being stimulated by products in the diet that are chemical and perhaps toxic. The extreme end is something like celiac or inflammatory bowel disease, when the gut lining is extremely inflamed and allows things through that aren't meant to be there into the bloodstream, which sets off a chain of reactions which then can lead to a number of diseases. So when I work with people, I look at their gut health quite often. We do markers of gut health, including looking at the bacteria in the gut, any parasites. We look at their immune system in the gut, and with that information, we're more armed to be able to heal the gut effectively, remove triggers in the gut, improve the bacteria, the good bacteria in the gut, kill off any nasties. Gut dysbiosis describes the sort of balance of good and bad bacteria in the gut. There's a kind of army in the gut of these good bacteria that fight off the bad. And we know that certain bacteria in the gut are correlated with improved longevity, of lowered risk of anxiety and depression. But what we haven't been able to do is show that seeding certain bacteria into the gut improve these symptoms. It's a bit more complicated and requires a change in diet. So on the right side there, you've got stress, as we've seen, inflammation as a driver of stress, metabolic syndrome, insulin, brain atrophy. We'll talk a little bit about here how to reduce inflammation and what are the triggers for inflammation. Mentioned here, eliminating refined sugar, processed carbs. We know that seal the gut wall, restore healthy flora. reducing your blue light exposure, especially at bed, which encourages deeper sleep, more melatonin, more growth hormone, which are all anti-inflammatory. Inflammation and mood. You've probably, or even the most mentally robust people, often feel really low and depressed when they've got the flu or a cold. It's because there's inflammation in the brain, which temporarily makes you feel even worse. It changes neurotransmitter function. We know that inflammatory drivers in the brain, the inflammation, can lower tryptophan levels, which make us crave things like sugar or other tryptophan, chocolate, which is a high tryptophan food. I often tell people just eat the dark stuff. It's just as high in tryptophan. It doesn't have the sugar, which will trigger the dopamine release, but it will definitely help with the tryptophan. I've also mentioned here again that the stress hormone cortisol is glucocorticoid and can be inflammatory and therefore reduce cognitive health, brain health over time. So the whole concept of how nutrition is related to Healthspan. Nutrigenomics is this new field which is blossoming, and it's really interesting to me. If you are interested, a lady that I'll come to talk about, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who has a PhD in metabolism, is absolutely incredible in this sphere, and she makes it quite understandable for everyone. So it's the interface between nutrition and genetics, how what you eat affects how you feel and what diseases you are likely to develop. There is a degree of personalization here, but we can use some rule of thumb strategies. There's a gene called the NF2 gene, which is a sort of master regulator. When it's switched on, it can control over 200 other genes. These are genes that can control your anti-inflammatory processes, antioxidants, and even the ability for your body to detoxify compounds you're exposed to on a daily basis, pollution, environmental estrogens, plastics, all of those things require detoxification by the liver. How well your detoxification systems work is to some extent genetically determined. How well you can influence your genetic determinism by how you eat and what supplements you take. I've mentioned a couple of these gene regulators here. Sulforaphane, curcumin, as we've all heard, is present in turmeric, green tea extract as well. So, talking a bit more about stress, I became interested in this. There's a book called The Upside of Stress, because we're all told too much stress is bad, it's terrible, we've got to modulate all our stress response, we've got to sit and be yogis all day long. But actually, there is some truth in the fact that what doesn't kill you may indeed make you stronger. But there is, with everything, a bell-shaped curve. We know that chronic, unremitting stress is damaging. But some stress it can be potentially beneficial to the body because it drives adaptive changes in the physiology which make you stronger. It has to be supported by adequate periods of rest, recovery, and micronutrient support. We know that calorie restriction is one of the only proven ways to actually live longer. You may be miserable living longer, but we do know that calorie restricting, specifically fasting as well, can extend lifespan. Exercise we've talked about quite a lot. Right, let's turn our attention to something a bit less stressful than the prospect of signing up to an Ironman. Broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts and seed extract contain something called sulforaphane, which I just mentioned. This is a buzzword in the kind of nutrigenomics industry at the moment because we know that it can stimulate and turn on genes that affect how well we age, affect how we clear cellular damage. The higher the rate, the clearance of cellular damage, the less likely we're to accumulate damage over time, which can determine how well we age and our disease development. A recent study literally came out this week, showed that sulforaphane reduced hepatic glucose production and improved glucose control in patients with type 2 diabetes. It's a very potent, effective stuff. It's available if you don't want to grow your own broccoli sprouts, which you can do. It's fairly time consuming. It's available as a supplement. The one that we use is called Neuroprotective, but it really does help to mitigate cellular damage. And also, as we've seen here, one of the best supplements to use with type 2 diabetics, alongside supplements like berberine and cinnamon. Another one of my favorite molecules, as it were, to improve health, brain function, skin, mood, is choline. It's used to make phosphatidylcholine and acetylcholine and methyl groups, which are all important in determining brain health and cellular energy levels. We know that acetylcholine levels decline in the brain with age. Short-term memory problems are related to lower acetylcholine levels in the brain. We know that by boosting choline levels naturally, patients with pre-dementia or even full-on Alzheimer's dementia actually improve in their activities of daily living and symptoms on questionnaires. The best ways to boost your choline levels is to have a lot of free-range eggs if you tolerate them, especially the very bright orange eggs that is a sign that they've got high levels of choline. Organ meats, liver, kidney, heart, and anything else you can think of is a very high source of choline. You can supplement in two ways using phosphatidylcholine, which is available as a liquid supplement, or companies like Solgar produce it. The one that I've found to be most effective, and is something that I use when I'm having to study or have intense periods of brain work or just an intense day at the clinic, is something called alpha GPC, which is a choline donor. It noticeably improves memory and attention, and there's been multiple clinical trials that have been used using a dose of around 600 milligrams. Vitamin D. We all know about vitamin D. I'm not going to bore you too much about it here, other than to say it affects lots of things. And probably as a key takeaway point, it's a steroid hormone. It regulates 5% of your whole genome. It's an important molecule. It probably explains why such a variety of human age-related diseases are associated with vitamin D deficiency. We know that higher maternal vitamin D levels are associated with babies born with those longer telomeres. And also, they have a lower risk of allergies. There was a recent study published by King's College that put people in two cohorts, one at 400 international units a day and one at 4,000. And they found that the women who were on the 4,000 international units had babies that had a significantly reduced incidence of allergies and diabetes and obesity by age 15. Dose matters. When people come to you and say, I'm taking a Holland & Barrett vitamin D supplement, I'm taking this and that, you've got to look at the dose. And also to do a test, because vitamin D, how well it gets into the body, is also genetically determined. If you have something called the VDR TAC gene, you're less likely to absorb vitamin D from supplements or food. So monitoring your levels, so it's 20, 30 quid to do a vitamin D test these days, and titrate to a dose that gets you sitting around 70 nanomoles a milliliter. Now, not many people, unless you are in the sun all the time or taking a supplement, actually are at that level. Having tested hundreds of people over the last few years, most people unsupplemented in the UK will be way down below 40. Something slightly more off-piste that we know can enhance cognitive function, brain function, prevent the accelerated aging process that happens in the brain. So make your brain stay healthier and live longer and more capable for longer. It's something called lion's mane. So it activates a nerve growth factor, which again acts on these cholinergic neurons, improves memory, short-term memory, and day-to-day activities. It's available as sachets. You can get it on Amazon, I'm pretty sure. And I put it in my morning smoothie now. Literally the last few weeks I've got interested in it. It tastes kind of funky though, as you can imagine by looking at it. Okay, quick breather. Food is information. It's a coding device to our genes. We are not predestined to look, feel, or age in a particular way. You do not have to look and age like your mother or father. What we eat and drink impacts every aspect of our physiology. And it's important to keep in mind that the goal of these recommended daily allowances is not to prevent aging or disease, but rather to prevent obvious signs of deficiency, like scurvy or beriberi. These are the things we were taught about at medical school. There's this concept of strategic micronutrient rationing, a sort of triage theory of what your body does with nutrients. And it's more driven towards short-term to survival rather than at the expense of aging well. So if you can imagine, nutrients that you take on a day-to-day basis will be shoveled down the pathways to keep you functioning well from a day-to-day, on a day-to-day level. They will not be necessarily proportioned to get you to age well and live longer. This is where the role of this so-called micronutrient smoothie comes in. And I mentioned this lady before, Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's got a very interesting YouTube channel where she shows you how to make micronutrient smoothies. You might spend your mornings chopping up chard, carrots, avocado, broccoli sprouts, coconut oil, and what else? And hydrolyzed collagen. We know that adding in exogenous ketones can keep your blood ketone levels higher, which makes your brain feel better, improves your mood. Things that are particularly high in ketones, medium chain triglyceride oil, coconut oil. Here she is again. This is her favorite breakfast. You've got kale sauteed in avocado oil, which has a high smoke point. You've got your eggs high in choline. You've got mustard seeds, which help activate some of the compounds in the greens. And you've got grapefruit on the side, which contains a number of compounds that lower inflammation. The core supplements, which I use as a result of listening to Rhonda Patrick for a number of years and some other people in the medical industry. A really good quality multi. I use a company called Designs for Health, which I get through in Vivo Clinical. They have really high, they're a medical grade supplement company, and having done tests with people before and after consistent use, I know they work and people feel better. Magnesium's important, but the type of magnesium is important. We use a blend with vitamin D of K2 because if too much vitamin D on its own puts calcium balance out. So we need to balance it out with vitamin K2. People don't get enough K2 anymore because we don't eat organ meats anymore much. At least you and me, I'm not sure. Fish oils, really important. Omega-3, I'll come to that in a second. Curcumin, orange liquid, specifically the Mariva form, the liposomal form of curcumin is best absorbed. Ubiquinol, which is the active form of coenzyme Q10. NAD, which is nicotinamide riboside. And the other two are more interesting compounds. TA65 in particular has been shown to lengthen telomeres. It's a very interesting compound, but hugely expensive at this time, therefore most of us cannot use it. VSL3 is a very strong probiotic, which is used to restore gut health. Medicines thought to influence Healthspan. I'm going to cross over that completely because I know it's very controversial, but we do know that metformin can improve, will make you live longer if you have diabetes. I'll just let that one go. Telomerase inhibitors, TA65, as I've said, is available on the market, but it costs £400 a month, and therefore you are only going to be taking it if you're very wealthy. Omega-3, go back to that. Omega-3 really matters, but what matters with omega-3 is dose, the quality of the supplement, and how you store it. You've got to keep it cold. We know that the ratio of EPA to DHEA matters. Get a high EPA version. Take between 2,000 and 4,000 milligrams of omega-3 a day. There are supplements on the market now that have high EPA, that are more concentrated forms of fish oil. They are the ones that have proven benefit in cardiovascular disease and depression and anxiety. Imagine 8% of the brain's weight is omega-3 oils. They're important. The quality of omega-3s in farm salmon or other fish that we get from the supermarket is very low these days. So unless you live by the sea, it's unlikely you'll be getting enough omega-3 through food. So some physiological strategies which may improve your health span. Time-restricted eating is important, as distinct from changing your diet to high fat, low carb. So even a 12-night overnight fast has been shown to improve all these parameters, improve your lean muscle mass, your glucose tolerance, your production of ketone bodies, which is we've talked about. So if you can extend that window up to 16 hours, you will likely be improving your health span. Stop eating at, say, 8 o'clock at night and don't eat again until 10 or 12 the next day. It takes a bit of adjustment, but it can be done, and we know it's beneficial on a number of levels. I could explain the biochemistry, but you will be likely very bored by that. Time-restricted feeding again, I've just mentioned. It's how it relates to the difference between low carb, high fat. They're very similar, but we know that not everyone responds to a high fat, low carb diet, and that is dependent on your genetics. You can measure your genes, which will determine how well you do on a high fat, low carb diet. A company called 23andMe, inexpensive, around 125 quid, will give you these genes to determine how likely you are to respond to a high fat, low carb diet. The benefit of time-restricted feeding over and above low carb, high fat is that it improves mitochondrial biogenesis, cellular cleanup, which low fat on its own does not, high fat on its own does not do. Something a bit more exciting, but has lots of evidence for it now. Saunering. People who sauna between 3 and 4 times a week live longer. Even the people that saunaed 4 or 5 times a week live longer than the ones that did it 3 times a week. So it's on my to-do list to get to sauna when we saved enough money. It's really important for you to stress your system a little bit. Getting hot on a regular basis, sitting in a sauna, really does, it can improve your health span and cardiovascular fitness independent of anything else you do. Cold stress does. The way it does that, noradrenaline, sympathetic nervous system, improves your mood, your endorphins, and also growth hormone release. If we're going to just finish off here, the most bang for your buck strategies. We all know about eliminating refined sugar from the diet. Time-restricted eating, allowing your body to clean itself, cellular clearance, maximize your vegetable intake. And we like using the micronutrient smoothie to try and get as many vegetables into a small amount of space as possible. Monitor your vitamin D, try and aim for that sweet spot of around 100. Vigorous cardiovascular exercise, 30 minutes a few times a week. Even if you do high intensity sessions, 30-second bursts, they've got to be a little bit uncomfortable to have the benefit we need. And getting bright blue light during the day as early as possible. Most importantly, play and enjoyment in your life. Smiling, encouraging, developing a community, finding your sense of purpose, what drives you is really important. And to close here with the 80-20 principle, this is how I like to think I live my life. What you do 80% of the time matters the most. Don't spend your time worrying about when you get it wrong 20% of the rest of the time. Give yourself a pat on the back for doing and living the way you do today. And just making small changes on a day-to-day basis will have big impacts on on your overall health span and how you